I think we can get started. So Karina, again, thanks so much for your time. Just a little bit of context, for people who are joining for the first time. Landa Talks is a space in which we bring in experienced independents who are a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of experience, client work, to just learn about their experience, what worked, what didn't. That's even more important, right? And in terms of format, we'll have 30 minutes Q&A, and then leave questions to the audience. If if a question really pops into your head, you can start leaving it in the chat. But just in terms of track record, we like, just unmuting yourself towards the end just to keep it a little bit more fluid. So again, Karina, you got a bit of a mixed kind of background, very well kind of different experiences, teacher, 2 decades in publishing, consultant. I just wanted to start with you kind of introducing yourself for the audience to get to meet you a little bit more. So you can tell us more about your background and career so far.
Sure. So yeah, I started out as a teacher many, many years ago, but I got tired. Well, I was young, and it was hard to be a high school teacher when I was 19, 20 years old myself. So I moved into publishing, spent 2 decades on the content ops production side of publishing, got tired of reorgs and layoffs because of Amazon and digital, so fell into freelance and consulting and what now is called fractional work, but didn't have a name back then. So I've been doing that fractional COO work for about 8-9 years. And I'm also a workflow consultant. And recently, or not so recently now, 1.5 years ago, I started Fractionals United, which is a free community for current and aspiring fractional leaders.
That's amazing. And then, just as a second to that kind of statement, like, how did that niche evolve over time? Because, usually you start with something and then kind of life takes you different ways. Now you're a fractional COO and workflow consultant. Like, how did that evolve over time? I'm just curious to hear.
Yeah. So every time I got let go from publishing, I, for a while, I didn't want to give up, right? Like, I loved books. I wanted to continue working in that. So I would do freelance work in between while I kept looking for my next senior role in publishing. I took a lot of like online courses and certificate programs trying to branch out, because, once you've worked in an industry, they see you as, even though like I did operations and content operations and productions and publishing, it was hard for me to get other industries to take a look at me. So I did some HR and business and other kinds of certificates and tried to take a lateral move to just be like more, I guess, more hire worthy in other industries. My first role that I think helped me do so was I was a part-time business manager for a niche publisher. So even though it was still publishing, I was managing customer support and inventory and a lot more than just publishing. She took a chance on me because of my publishing industry. And from that, I was then able to do more like, regular operations roles, and just kept building on that. Along the way, I realized that I really love automating things. This actually started, oddly, with me using a project management tool called Trello. It's still around. At one point, I was like a Trello super user. They had this plugin called Butler, which allowed you to automate things. And I was like, oh my God, this is magic. So I learned as much as I could. When I got to the max of Butler, I discovered Zapier and took a Zapier course. And fast forward, I've become a workflow consultant because I really love like all the automating, optimizing, integrating. And obviously I use that in my ops work too, but I do that on its own as project work as well. And then I used to tell people that before fractional was a thing, that no founder goes into business to run a business. And as soon as they have any success, they get overwhelmed with the day-to-day and hire someone like me to run the business for them. It's so much easier to say fractional COO than that mouthful, but that's basically what it was. And I fell into that because I enjoy making things run better, and there was a need. And, yeah, so that was kind of how it evolved.
Makes a lot of sense. I love it because one of our previous guests, his tagline on LinkedIn is hand me the importance, like, so you can handle the urgent. And I feel like that's a great definition for fractional COO as well. I guess like that's a good segue to just kind of look at some of the most common challenges you see in, for client work. Like what are the biggest operational challenges you're seeing companies face right now? And who are you particularly like solving those for? Is there like a particular stage of company you're working with or just particular industry? Curious to hear more.
Yeah, so let me answer the second question first, and then I'll go backwards. So I focus on professional services, SaaS, and community with 10 plus employees. Like I've done the 0 to 1, but I'm not, I've been like the first ops person or the first anything and set everything up, but I'm not really interested in doing that right now. And I would say some of the biggest challenges are like there's so many tools and people tend to get tool crazy, and then there is no unified, like they don't know where to find anything or where to put anything or what, you've got Slack, you've got email, you've got one of countless tools, you've got Zoom, you've got this, that, and the other. Where do things go? Where do I find anything? What do I do next? And like, one of the things that I roll out for any of my clients or for my businesses, email is for external communication, Slack or something like that is for internal communication. And then whatever your PM, project management tool is, that's for anything actionable. And then of course you have like some kind of like, G Drive for files, right? And you can have a wiki in your PM tool or whatever. But like that, everything has a place. You know where to put it, you know where to find it. It's really simple, but common sense isn't common, right? Even though it seems common for some of us. But just simplifying things like that.
Makes a lot of sense. And I feel like there has to be a story of like resistance in this, right? Because communication can be very, very resistance heavy. Just in terms of communication, like where do I put my stuff? Can you walk me through just one experience you had where it was like just very, very tough to solve this in a company?
Yeah, I think the hardest is like you said, it's just getting people to see the why. I think if you can explain to them or get them to see the benefits and give them baby steps, because like I've had some founders that are I wouldn't say tech phobic, but they're not, tech adapt, right? So they're, like you talk to them about Slack. That's the biggest one, right? Like people who haven't used Slack, and if they weren't onboarded to Slack correctly the first time, are resistant to it. So it's harder, like I think first impressions and onboarding people on a tool right the first time is so important because it's so much harder to do it a second time and break through all their like misunderstandings or bad impressions. And something like Slack can be so powerful, but I've had founders that are like, oh, we tried it and it didn't work. And then I had to work really hard to show them and explain to them why like it can work. Let's just start simple. And eventually they got it and loved it, but it just took a lot harder if they had been, mistrained on it or just thrown into it without any training.
Makes a lot of sense. And then fast forward, like I'm just curious to hear because you're also working with a bunch of fractionals, right? Like, what are some of the skills you see that are like most relevant when kind of defining that as your niche? As a fractional CEO, like what makes a good one versus a bad one? I was curious to hear your thoughts as well.
So I think there's two parts of it. There's the fractional and there's the COO. So let me first quickly address, I seem to be doing things backwards. Sorry. Let me quickly address the COO part because it's a little easier, and then the fractional. I think to be successful as a fractional COO, you have to have been a full-time COO. Like, I strongly believe that you can't do anything well fractionally that you have not done full-time, and that you haven't done it at least at a senior level. Because the whole concept of fractional, unlike consulting, is that you are part of the team, you're an embedded senior leader with people reporting to you, etc., right? So you can't do that on a part-time basis well if you haven't learned it, and got, made mistakes as a full-time leader. So that's the CO part. Just being a fractional in general, yes, you have to have done this full-time, but you also have to be willing to be your own boss and do business development and be really good at time management and juggling multiple clients. And in some ways, it's a lot harder. Like, if you have one client 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, right? That's all you do. And then when you're not doing that, you're spending time with family and hobbies. If you're a fractional or a consultant or any kind of independent, you have to deal with taxes. You have to deal with, like, everything that the government wants, depending on which country you are, it's different ways, right? But you are your own entity. And then you have to do business development, and you have to do customer support, and you have to juggle all these clients. So it's a lot harder. Yes, it can be very liberating and profitable and wonderful. I wouldn't be doing it otherwise, right? But it's not for everyone, and it is not easy.
And that brings me to another question, which is like most common mistakes, right? Like, because most of Landa is just like first-time consultants, right? They're just transitioning into this. And then one of the most kind of useful things in these kind of conversations are just mistakes, right? Like, so just walk me through some of those mistakes you did in the past, or just common mistakes you're seeing other fractionals doing when they're starting, that people here can maybe avoid in the future.
Yeah. So one mistake that I did and that I've learned not to do is, if you talk to marketers, they tell you to niche, and it seems counterintuitive, right? Because you want to catch as much business as possible. But the truth is, if you're so broad, you're not memorable. And the only way to find work as an independent is through networking and referrals. And you have to be memorable, right? Like, you need to be able to stand out, and you need to be able to quickly explain, who your ideal customer is. And like, if it's too broad, it's going to work against you, even though it doesn't sound like it will. And another thing is, when you're doing, like, if you're busy doing the work, you still have to find a time to like keep like being out there somehow, right? To some degree, whether it's through a community, right? Just like, don't put your head down, and like forget about your network till like you run out of work, and then you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And that's the other challenge, right? You have to constantly. And when I say networking, like, I'm an introvert, which, yes, I know, I run a large community. It's hard. I'm an introvert. I hate networking, right? But like, it doesn't have to be like, find me work, find me work. It's just like helping people, being engaged in a community, just having a voice, showing up at a meetup. It could be fun. It could be low key, but like, don't disappear when you're busy and then reappear when you need it. Like, maintain some consistency, have a little like referral network of people who know your work, who know what you do, who you can send work to, who can send work to you.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. And then obviously I want to transition into Fractional United, right? You built a community of now 11,600 fractionals. That's wild. So first of all, congrats, Karina. But I'm curious to hear, just going to your last point about community, right? Like, how do you see it kind of, the role of it actually like playing in your success as a consultant, and how do you like particularly foster it through a community? What's been kind of like the tips of the trade for you, and just having people like yourself, right, who are introverted, to have these kind of safe spaces and have those conversations? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So I actually have worked really hard not to take advantage of Frun personally. So I don't expect any special treatment. We have a fractional jobs channel. Occasionally, if something's interesting to me, I apply like everyone else. There have been a few people who, in the early days, wanted me in their referral network, and I was really honest that I can't, right? Like, if anything comes to me, I have to share it equally with the community. I can't just share it with members. So in some ways, I may have made it harder for myself, but like whatever. And honestly, I couldn't have foreseen this. I've also found that on social, I have to be the voice of or Frun and fractionals. I rarely post about being a fractional COO on LinkedIn because I have found it nearly impossible to do both authentically without feeling like one is at the advantage of the other. So one-on-one, I tell people I'm a fractional COO. If and when I'm looking for more clients, I let them know, which, by the way, I am right now. So if anyone has something or knows of someone, but it's one-on-one. I can't do it on social. I have talked to marketers and copywriters, and they've given me tips, and it just doesn't feel like me. So I've decided, this is the situation, and it's fine.
Makes sense. And maybe I step maybe a little bit forward, but just for context, can you give a little bit of perspective of Fractionals United, how it started, kind of what led you to actually build it? Just for everybody to have a little bit more context. I'm part of communities, so I know it, but maybe others don't actually.
So in the beginning of 2023, actually, let's take a step back. When I started doing fractional work or just consulting, Upwork was still viable for high-level work. It no longer is. It's crap on crap, and it's a race to the bottom. So I'm no longer on there. But because I'm an introvert, I got most of my original work and clients through Upwork. Like, yes, it was a numbers game, but if you put in the time, there was enough well-paid high-level work that you could get. In 20, it's like Blur's day and Blur's year. I am having, ever since COVID, I don't remember what year or anything. I think it was in 2019, 2020. I don't remember. I had a workflow client that ended up becoming a fractional COO client that ended up, I went full-time with them for a short period, which sometimes happens. We parted ways in the beginning of 2023 because they no longer needed me. I was too expensive, once everything was in place. That also often happens. And I came back to a very different fractional climate than 2 years prior to that. Upwork was no longer viable. On the one hand, fractionals seemed to be a lot more common, right? There were more fractionals. There were even some large media articles about fractional, but it felt lonelier and harder. And back then, I didn't know why. I do now, and I can tell you in a minute. But I had joined some really great online communities, like Ops Focus during COVID. So I knew the power of community, and I started looking for my fractional people, right? I didn't want to have to figure this out on my own. I wanted community. So I had that idea January 7th. It was a Saturday, 2023. That evening, I was Googling like mad, looking for my peeps. I couldn't quite find it. There were a couple of, I guess, pseudo communities, which I mean by communities on the other side of a program or some kind of a paid firewall or something, right? Not community for the sake of community. And I remember looking up at my husband and I'm like, is this the thing I do? I don't know. Let's see if there's interest. So literally I was like, okay, it's funny, I'm not a marketer, but I start by looking for a domain. So I went on namecheap.com. I'm like, okay, what's available? I'm like, okay, Fractionals United. Okay, that works. All right, so that's my domain. Funny story, only after I got the domain did my husband point out the unfortunate acronym, which is why we go by FRUN and not FU. Yes, I know. Anyhow, so I got the domain, did a quick landing page, put up a free Slack, messaged a bunch of my communities, put it up on LinkedIn. And I was like, okay, let's see what happens. By the end of that first weekend, we had over 50 members and everybody was like, yes, please, yes, please, yes, please. And it's been, and we grow about 5 to 650 a month, depending on the month. And like you said, it's now, I think 19 months in, we're at 11,600 something. So obviously there was an interest.
That's funny. And then that leads me to another question, which is obviously, like 1.5 almost years in. What have you learned about kind of the mindset and motivations of all these people kind of joining and trying to become fractionals that you maybe didn't picture before, that weren't maybe your case? What has been the kind of that common thread? I'm curious.
So we are a combination of current fractionals, fractionally curious, and aspiring fractionals. And I did that intentionally. So obviously the current fractionals, are looking for community. The aspiring fractionals are looking to figure out how to get this going. And the fractionally curious are like either in between jobs, or they've heard of this, or they're still in work and they're wondering if this is for them and they want to know more. And I intentionally made this open to all of them because, to me, if this is Fractionals United, then we're uniting everyone interested in fractional. The only thing we do, and again, like for the first 3 months, it was me doing everything. And then I hired Tammy part-time, and now we have Ray and like a small team. And it's evolved and iterated. But the one thing we currently look for is that you are at least a senior leader, because we do define fractional as a senior leadership role.
Makes total sense. And then one of the things I'm super curious about in this conversation is, where do you see this trend going, right? It's obviously exploding. It's growing very rapidly, especially in the US. It's starting to grow in Latin America. I think we're, taking a little bit of a step with that. But I'm curious to hear, what do you see kind of happening in the future? What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the challenges? I think this is a very curious question.
I do believe that fractional is the future. It makes so much sense for like SMB startups and scale-ups. The biggest challenge is the lack of awareness and education. Like, you would be, or maybe you wouldn't be, amazed at how few people who need us know we exist or understands, right, what it is and what we can bring to the table. So I actually created fractionaldefine.com, as something anyone can use to help spread awareness. And, there's a fractional conference coming up. We've created the Fractional Leadership Alliance. Like, there's all these other things happening, to help spread awareness and to help this, I don't know if you want to call it a sector or industry or whatever we are, right? To help this grow and as fast as possible, because like I really believe there will come a day when it is as easy to find a fractional job as it is a full-time, or maybe that'll actually be the default for companies up to a certain size. We're just not there yet. And I unfortunately don't have a view into the future to predict exactly how long it's going to take. I wish I had a crystal ball, but it's going to come. I just don't know when.
That's interesting. And you obviously also talk to companies about it, both for like, lead generation yourself, but also for fun. But what's kind of your pitch? I'm curious to hear that. What's your pitch in terms of why this makes sense? I obviously talk to a lot of companies as well, and I agree that's the biggest challenge. It's just educating kind of them, which feels a little bit arrogant, but it just, what you don't know that you don't know, right? But I'm curious to hear how you pitch it as well, and that might be super useful for folks here.
Yeah, so basically, unless you're like a Fortune 500 or whatever, you don't really need a senior leader for 40 hours. Chances are you need us for maybe 20, or, it varies depending on what's going on. You need our experience, you need our expertise, you need our leadership. You don't need to pay us 40 hours. Because if we have the right team executing, we can be that force multiplier. We can be that competitive advantage, that you can actually compete with larger companies and bring us in on a fractional basis.
Amazing. A lot of questions that have just kind of swing by, and I have like so many, but we're actually getting towards the end. And I want to have kind of the audience ask a couple questions as well. But I guess one of the things that I'm super curious was just if you had to give one practical tip for somebody starting out, after both your experience kind of working with 11,000 fractionals, like what's the one thing that they should focus on, or just one mistake they shouldn't be doing, just one practical thing you would suggest?
I guess it's a two-step answer. Be aware it's going to take time, right? So if you need to take other work to pay the bills, that's fine, right? Like do what you need to do, and just know that it's about the relationships and who you know, but it has to be truly about connection. Like if you're going to start, spamming everyone on LinkedIn or spamming in everyone in the community and come across desperate, you're going to do the exact opposite of what you want. Like you're going to turn them off. Like I know, that's why, like, if you have to freelance, if you have to do whatever to pay the bills, right? But you have to start it from like connection. People need to care, and they need to know who you are. And the only way to do that is find common denominators and like be a human being. Like don't, it's funny, yesterday I posted a PSA about LinkedIn on LinkedIn because I'm so annoyed about how many people just like DM me. And the next person who DMs me trying to sell me like workflow or ops or optimization is going to get a mouthful. Like, look at my profile. Do I need help with that? Or can I maybe do that on my own? It's just whatever. The point is, like, be a human, be there for the right reasons, give to get, don't sell, connect.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. And I love the hashtag. I think it was don't always be selling, right?
Don't always be selling.
Amazing. So we got towards the end. I got a couple quick questions at last, Karina. First one is going to be hard, it's kind of publisher, but it's what's your favorite book? The one that has influenced you the most?
Oh, that's a hard one. I read a lot, but I'd say the one that I'll say just because it is straight up to rereading is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Like that man is amazing. And like, that's one of the few newsletters that I literally like, I save and reread 2 or 3 times because every word is like a gem. And it's, yeah, like, I don't know how he does it, but that's definitely, I would say, my favorite.
Amazing. That's a good segue for the second one, which is there one habit that you consistently follow that's changed your life? It may be reading. I think it might be reading, but I'm curious to hear your answer.
I would say it's either always be learning or always be optimizing, right? It's like no system is foolproof, or even if it's foolproof today, it will need updating later. Be paying attention, be learning, be trying to improve.
Very accurate to your profile as well. And the last one is, what would be something that you'd like to be remembered for?
I guess at this point, helping, the fractional revolution happen.
I love it. I love it. Well, again, thanks a lot for the time, Karina.